The sound of Maria's rifle shot rolled across the training ground like distant thunder, followed by an expectant silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Through spotting scopes and binoculars, observers watched for the impact at the impossibly distant target. At 1,500 meters, even the sound delay was noticeable, creating an eerie disconnect between the rifle's report and the eventual confirmation of the bullet's arrival. "Direct hit," the spotter announced, his voice carrying surprise despite the professional neutrality he tried to maintain. "Center mass impact on the target." General Kozlov lowered his field glasses slowly, processing what he had just witnessed. Hitting a target at 1,500 meters required not just marksmanship skill, but precise calculation of multiple environmental factors. The fact that Maria had achieved this on her first attempt suggested either exceptional luck or genuinely advanced capabilities. Sergeant Volkov studied the target through his own optics, unwilling to accept what the evidence clearly showed. "Wind conditions were nearly ideal," he muttered. "Anyone could make that shot under perfect circumstances." But even as he spoke, Volkov knew his dismissal rang hollow. He had personally attempted shots at similar distances under comparable conditions and achieved mixed results. The mathematics involved in such precision shooting were complex enough that many experienced snipers preferred to avoid attempting them, unless absolutely necessary. Maria remained in position, following through with her shot as she had been taught. Her father had emphasized the importance of calling each shot, mentally noting where the crosshairs had been aligned at the moment of trigger release. This discipline allowed shooters to predict their impact points and make corrections for subsequent attempts. "The crosshairs were steady on target center when the rifle fired," she reported calmly. Wind appeared consistent throughout the bullet's flight path, with no significant thermal disturbance visible through the scope. General Kozlov noted her technical language and professional demeanor. Many shooters, even experienced ones, became emotional after successful long-range engagements. Maria's composed analysis suggested someone who viewed precision shooting as a craft requiring continuous refinement, rather than a series of lucky occurrences. "Acceptable performance," the general acknowledged, though privately he was impressed. "However, 2,500 meters will present significantly greater challenges. At that distance, atmospheric conditions become exponentially more important, and the margin for error decreases dramatically." Colonel Dmitri approached from the observation area, having witnessed the entire engagement through high-powered optics. "Kozlov, this is remarkable. I've seen veteran snipers struggle with 1,500-meter shots. If she can demonstrate similar capability at extended ranges, it could change our operational planning considerably." The implications were significant beyond mere technical achievement. Intelligence reports consistently described enemy commanders positioning themselves at distances they believed safe from Soviet sniper capabilities. A shooter who could engage targets effectively beyond conventional ranges would provide tactical advantages that extended far beyond individual eliminations. "We'll test 2,500 meters in 2 days," General Kozlov decided. "That will allow time for proper preparation and ensure optimal atmospheric conditions. At that distance, we're approaching the theoretical limits of rifle accuracy with standard ammunition." Over the following 48 hours, Maria immersed herself in advanced ballistics study. The base technical library contained detailed analyses of long-range shooting factors, including atmospheric density effects, Coriolis influence from Earth's rotation, and the complex mathematics of trajectory calculation at extreme distances. What had seemed like abstract theory during her father's lessons now became practical necessity. She also spent hours on the range, not shooting, but observing. Wind patterns varied throughout the day, as temperature changes created different atmospheric conditions. Morning air was typically more stable, while afternoon thermal currents could create unpredictable disturbances. Learning to read these environmental signs was as important as fundamental marksmanship skills. Sergeant Volkov watched her preparations with growing unease. His position as the unit's premier marksman felt threatened by this woman who seemed to approach precision shooting with scientific methodology, rather than relying purely on experience and instinct. He had built his reputation on aggressive confidence and natural ability, but Maria's systematic preparation suggested a different approach to the craft. The morning of the 2,500-meter test dawned with overcast skies and variable winds. Conditions were far from ideal, with gusting air currents and occasional light precipitation threatening to complicate an already difficult shot. General Kozlov considered postponing the exercise, but intelligence reports had arrived overnight, describing urgent operational requirements for extended range capabilities. Weather conditions are marginal, the meteorologist reported as observers gathered at the firing line. Wind speed varies from 5 to 15 kilometers per hour, with direction shifts occurring approximately every 3 minutes. Temperature is steady at 2 degrees below zero, but humidity is elevated due to the overcast conditions. Maria studied the distant target through her rifle scope, noting how atmospheric distortion made it appear to waver and shift even when perfectly stationary. At 2,500 meters, the target seemed impossibly small, requiring precise scope adjustment just to maintain visual contact. Environmental factors that had been manageable at shorter distances now became critical variables requiring constant attention. "This represents a German artillery commander," General Kozlov explained as Maria prepared her rifle. "Intelligence suggests such officers are coordinating attacks against our positions from locations they believe immune to counter-sniper fire. Success here could demonstrate capability for missions currently considered impossible." The mathematics of the shot were daunting. Bullet drop at 2,500 meters would require massive elevation adjustments, while wind drift could easily push the projectile several meters off target if conditions weren't read correctly. Temperature and humidity effects on ammunition. Performance added additional variables to an already complex equation. Maria calculated each factor methodically, cross-referencing atmospheric data with ballistics tables. At this distance, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 3 seconds, providing ample time for wind conditions to change during its trajectory. She would need to predict average conditions rather than simply reading current measurements. Through her scope, she watched vegetation at various distances to gauge wind patterns. Close to her position, grass moved steadily to the southwest. At intermediate distances, trees showed different movement patterns, suggesting wind shear at various altitudes. Near the target, barely visible indicators suggested yet another wind direction, creating a complex three-dimensional puzzle of air currents. "This is the kind of shot that separates genuine precision shooters from talented amateurs," General Kozlov observed quietly to Colonel Dmitri. "At this distance, luck becomes irrelevant. Success depends entirely on technical knowledge, environmental reading, and flawless execution." Maria controlled her breathing and settled into her most stable firing position. The crosshairs danced, slightly due to atmospheric distortion, requiring her to time the shot for a moment of maximum clarity. She had learned to recognize these brief windows when all factors seemed to align optimally. The rifle cracked like a whip, its sound sharp, in the cold morning air. General Kozlov studied Maria's face for any sign of doubt or second thoughts, but found only determined resolve. Her quiet acceptance of the seemingly impossible challenge impressed him, though he wondered if she truly understood what she had just committed herself to attempting. In 30 years of military service, he had seen countless soldiers volunteer for dangerous missions, but few had faced a test quite this public or technical. "Very well," he said finally. "But understand the conditions. You'll have 3 attempts over the next week to demonstrate capability at extended ranges. We'll start at 1,500 meters tomorrow, then move to 2,500 if you're successful. Only if you prove yourself at those distances will we attempt the 4,000-meter shot." Sergeant Volkov crossed his arms, clearly displeased with this development. "Sir, this is highly irregular. We have established training protocols for good reasons. Allowing unproven personnel to attempt advanced techniques could set dangerous precedents." The general acknowledged his sergeant's concerns with a nod. "Your objections are noted, Volkov. However, exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional approaches. Our intelligence reports suggest enemy commanders are positioning themselves at increasingly distant observation points, believing themselves safe from our current capabilities." This was true, though Kozlov didn't mention the classified reports describing how opposing forces had begun placing high-value targets at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters, specifically because they had learned about Soviet sniper limitations. The war's evolution demanded corresponding evolution in tactics and capabilities. Tomorrow at dawn, the general continued, Petrova will attempt the 1,500-meter engagement. Weather permitting, conditions should be optimal for long-range work. I want full documentation of wind speed, temperature, humidity, and atmospheric pressure. This will be treated as a legitimate training exercise, not a publicity stunt. That evening, Maria sat alone in her barracks, cleaning and inspecting her assigned rifle with methodical precision. The other recruits had given her a wide berth since the afternoon's events, uncertain how to respond to someone who had just volunteered for what many considered a fool's errand. Some whispered that she was either incredibly brave or dangerously overconfident. She had requested additional technical manuals from the base library, studying ballistics tables and atmospheric data late into the night. At 1,500 meters, bullet drop would be significant, requiring precise elevation adjustments. More challenging would be reading wind conditions accurately across such distance, as air currents could vary considerably between her position and the target. Her father's teachings echoed in her memory as she worked. Distance shooting isn't just about the rifle or the ammunition, he had told her during those early hunting expeditions. It's about becoming part of the environment, understanding how temperature affects powder burn, how humidity changes bullet flight, how the earth itself influences trajectory over extreme distances. Those lessons had seemed almost mystical when she was 12 years old, but years of practice had taught her their practical truth. Successful long-range shooting required integrating dozens of variables into split-second calculations, then trusting in preparation and fundamental skills when the moment came to fire. Meanwhile, in the officers' quarters, General Kozlov reviewed personnel files and considered the implications of the next day's test. Maria's background was more interesting than he had initially realized. Her village had been overrun during early German advances, but not before mounting surprisingly effective resistance. Local reports mentioned several enemy officers eliminated by precise rifle fire from extreme distances, though specific details remained classified. "You're taking quite a gamble with this woman," Colonel Dmitri observed, entering with fresh intelligence reports. "Word has already spread to divisional headquarters. People are curious about your female sniper candidate." Kozlov poured 2 glasses of tea from the samovar in the corner. "Perhaps, but consider our current situation. Enemy commanders are adapting to our conventional sniper capabilities by increasing their standoff distances. We need shooters who can engage targets beyond normal effective ranges." The colonel accepted his tea and settled into a worn leather chair. "And you think this farm girl from Ukraine might be that solution?" "I think she possesses natural ability combined with genuine technical knowledge," Kozlov replied carefully. "More importantly, she demonstrates the kind of focused determination that can't be taught. Whether that translates into extreme range, capability remains to be seen." Dawn came cold and clear, with minimal wind and excellent visibility. Maria arrived at the firing range an hour early, studying atmospheric conditions and noting how morning temperature variations might affect ammunition performance. The 1,500-meter target appeared impossibly small through her rifle scope, a dark silhouette against distant earthworks. General Kozlov arrived with several observers, including Sergeant Volkov and the unit's meteorologist. Formal measurements confirmed ideal shooting conditions with steady winds from the northwest at approximately 8 kilometers per hour. Temperature stood at -3 degrees Celsius, cold enough to affect ballistics but within manageable parameters. "Your target represents an enemy artillery observer," the general explained as Maria settled into her firing position. "Intelligence suggests such observers are positioning themselves at increasingly distant locations, directing fire against our advancing units. Eliminating them could save significant casualties among our own forces." Maria adjusted her rifle's scope settings, compensating for the increased distance and environmental factors. Through the magnified optics, she could see heat shimmer beginning to rise as morning sun warmed the ground. This added another variable to consider, as thermal effects could cause apparent target movement even when the actual target remained stationary. The mathematics of the shot ran through her mind like a familiar equation. bullet drop at 1,500 meters would require approximately 12 minutes of angle elevation adjustment. Wind drift would push the projectile roughly 18 centimeters to the left, assuming consistent conditions throughout the bullet's flight time. Temperature effects on powder burn would slightly reduce muzzle velocity, requiring minor additional elevation compensation. Take your time, General Kozlov advised. In combat, you might have only seconds to make such calculations, but for training purposes, accuracy is more important than speed. Maria controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to settle into the steady rhythm she had learned to recognize. Through the scope, the target wavered slightly due to atmospheric distortion, requiring her to time the shot for a moment of maximum stability. She had learned to recognize these brief windows when all variables seemed to align properly. The rifle fired with crisp authority, its report echoing across the training ground. The silence that followed Maria's perfect shot stretched uncomfortably long. General Kozlov lowered his binoculars, his expression shifting from skeptical dismissal to cautious interest. Around the firing line, the gathered recruits exchanged uncertain glances. Sergeant Volkov's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a scowl that suggested his worldview had just been challenged in an unwelcome way. "Beginner's luck," Volkov muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Anyone can get lucky once. Let's see her do it again." General Kozlov ignored his subordinate's comment and approached Maria, who was still in firing position, following proper range protocol by keeping the rifle pointed downrange until instructed otherwise. Her breathing remained controlled, her posture relaxed but alert. These were good signs indicating someone who understood weapon safety and had genuine training rather than mere enthusiasm. "Stand down, Petrova," the general commanded. As Maria safely cleared the weapon and set it aside, he studied her face for signs of surprise or excitement at her success. Instead, he found calm confidence, as if hitting the target had been exactly what she expected to happen. This intrigued him more than the shot itself. "That was acceptable for 800 meters, he said, choosing his words carefully. "But long-range precision shooting isn't just about hitting targets at comfortable distances. It's about making impossible shots when lives depend on it. When enemy commanders think they're safe behind their lines, assuming no one could possibly reach them from such extreme distances." Maria nodded respectfully. "I understand, sir. My father taught me that every shot matters, but some shots can change the course of entire battles. He served as a scout sniper in the previous war and told me stories about eliminating artillery observers and communications officers from positions the enemy thought were invulnerable." The mention of her father's military service caught Kozlov's attention. Scout snipers from the Great War had been elite soldiers, often operating alone behind enemy lines for weeks at a time. If she had been trained by such a veteran, that might explain her technical knowledge and composed demeanor under pressure. "Your father's experience is valuable," Kozlov admitted, "but this war is different. The distances are greater, the stakes are higher, and the enemy is better equipped than anything your father faced. Modern warfare requires shots that push the absolute limits of what's physically possible." He gestured toward a distant hillside where barely visible targets had been placed at various extreme ranges. "Out there at 1,500 meters, we have targets that simulate enemy officers. Beyond that, at 2,500 meters, we've placed equipment that represents high-value assets like radio operators or artillery spotters. And at the very limit of our range, 4,000 meters away, there's a single target that represents the kind of impossible shot that could save hundreds of Allied lives." Maria studied the distant terrain through her own field glasses, noting the heat shimmer rising from sun-warmed ground and the way vegetation moved in response to changing wind patterns. At such distances, environmental factors became exponentially more important than marksmanship fundamentals. Temperature variations could cause significant changes in ammunition performance, while wind conditions might vary dramatically between the shooter's position and the target. "In actual combat," the general continued, "you might have only one opportunity to make such a shot. Enemy snipers will be hunting you, artillery might be incoming, and your own forces could be depending on your success for their survival. There's no time for practice rounds or adjustments." Sergeant Volkov stepped forward, unable to contain his skepticism any longer. "Sir, with respect, we're wasting time here. Even our best marksmen struggle with shots beyond 3,000 meters. The variables become too complex, the margin for error too small. This is specialized work that requires years of training and combat experience." Several other recruits nodded in agreement, though whether from genuine conviction or desire to support their sergeant was unclear. Maria had noticed the unit's dynamics during her first week of training. Volkov commanded considerable respect among the men, partly due to his undeniable skill but also because of his aggressive confidence. Challenging him, even indirectly, meant challenging the established hierarchy. General Kozlov considered his sergeant's words. Volkov wasn't wrong about the technical difficulties involved. Long-range shooting beyond 3,000 meters required not just exceptional marksmanship skills, but also advanced understanding of ballistics, meteorology, and fieldcraft. Most snipers never attempted such shots because the probability of success seemed too low to justify the risk of revealing their position. "Perhaps you're right, Volkov," the general said slowly. "But warfare has always advanced through pushing boundaries that seemed impossible. Our enemies certainly aren't limiting themselves to conservative tactics." He turned back to Maria, his expression becoming more serious. "Petrova, I'm going to offer you a choice. You can join our standard sniper program, which focuses on effective ranges up to 800 meters. You'll receive excellent training and likely see combat within a few months. It's honorable work that contributes meaningfully to our war effort." Maria waited, sensing that an alternative was coming. "Or," the general continued, "you can attempt something that's never been successfully completed by anyone in this unit. If you can demonstrate the ability to engage targets effectively at ranges beyond 3,000 meters, I'll consider you for our most specialized assignments. These are missions that require operating alone deep behind enemy lines, making shots that others would consider impossible." The challenge hung in the air like morning mist. Everyone present understood the implications. Success would mean acceptance into an elite group and access to the war's most dangerous but potentially impactful missions. Failure would likely mean dismissal from sniper training entirely, with probable reassignment to conventional infantry roles. Maria looked once more toward the distant targets, calculating wind conditions and considering the variables involved. 4,000 meters was indeed at the extreme edge of rifle capability, requiring perfect conditions and flawless execution. But she remembered her village burning, remembered her promise, and knew that playing it safe would never give her the opportunity to make the kind of difference she sought. "I'll take the long shot, sir," she said quietly. The crack of Maria's rifle echoed across the training ground, followed by the peculiar silence that accompanies long-range shooting. At 2,500 meters, the time delay between muzzle flash and impact created an almost supernatural suspension of reality. Observers held their breath, watching through high-powered optics as the invisible projectile traveled its calculated arc through cold morning air. "Impact confirmed." The spotter's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Dead center hit on target. General." Kozlov felt something shift in his understanding of what was possible. 2 consecutive hits at extended range moved beyond coincidence into the realm of genuine capability. Through his field glasses, he could see the bullet hole precisely centered on the silhouette target, exactly where a shot would need to be placed to eliminate an enemy commander at such distance. Sergeant Volkov stared through his own optics, his face reflecting the confusion of someone whose fundamental assumptions about warfare were being challenged. He had witnessed something that contradicted everything he believed about the practical limits of rifle marksmanship. At 2,500 meters, environmental variables should have made precise shot placement nearly impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. The conditions were hardly optimal, Colonel Dmitri observed, consulting his meteorological notes. Variable winds, elevated humidity, and temperature fluctuations that would challenge our most experienced marksmen. Yet she managed to compensate for all of these factors simultaneously. Maria remained motionless in her firing position, following the discipline her father had instilled regarding shot analysis. She mentally reviewed each element of the engagement, noting how wind conditions had changed during the bullet's flight, and evaluating whether her calculations had been accurate or merely fortunate. Wind shift occurred approximately 1 second, After firing, she reported with clinical precision, the bullet appears to have traveled through the predicted air currents before conditions changed significantly. Thermal distortion was minimal due to overcast conditions, allowing clear target definition throughout the engagement. Her technical analysis impressed the observers as much as the successful hit. Most shooters, even experienced ones, became excited after achieving difficult shots and lost focus on the methodical evaluation necessary for consistent performance. Maria's composed professionalism suggested someone who understood that individual successes meant nothing without the ability to repeat them under varying conditions. General Kozlov approached her position, his expression serious. Petrova, what you've accomplished here challenges our understanding of practical sniper capabilities. However, the ultimate test remains ahead. 4,000 meters represents the absolute theoretical limit of rifle effectiveness with standard ammunition. He paused, considering the implications of what he was about to propose. At that distance, you'll be dealing with variables that most ballistics experts consider unmanageable. Earth's rotation becomes a significant factor. Atmospheric pressure. Variations can change bullet trajectory by meters. Temperature differences between your position and the target area create unpredictable air density changes. Maria nodded, understanding the magnitude of the challenge. 4,000 meters was beyond the effective range of most artillery pieces, representing a distance where rifle bullets approach the limits of their ballistic capabilities. Success would require perfect conditions, flawless calculations, and execution that left absolutely no margin for error. Moreover, the general continued, Maria Petrova stood at attention in the dusty training ground, her hands steady despite the mocking laughter echoing around her. The other recruits, all men, had stopped their own exercises to watch what they assumed would be an embarrassing display. At barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with calloused hands from years of farm work, she didn't look like someone who belonged among elite military marksmen. General Viktor Kozlov approached with heavy boots crunching against the gravel. His weathered face showed the kind of skepticism that came from 30 years of military service. He had seen countless recruits come and go, but never had a woman attempted to join his specialized sniper unit. The year was 1943, and the Eastern Front demanded every capable soldier, but Kozlov wasn't convinced this young woman from a remote Ukrainian village could handle the pressures of precision warfare. Petrova, he barked, stopping just inches from her face. Do you understand what we do here? This isn't target practice at a county fair. My snipers eliminate enemy officers from distances that would make your village elders weep. We're talking about shots beyond 4,000 meters where the curvature of the earth becomes a factor. Maria kept her eyes forward, remembering her father's hunting lessons in the forests near her childhood home. Those early morning expeditions had taught her patience, wind reading, and the importance of controlling her breathing. Her father, a veteran of the Great War, had recognized something special in his daughter's natural ability with a rifle. While other girls her age learned domestic skills, Maria spent her time studying ballistics and practicing on makeshift ranges. The general continued his intimidation, pacing back and forth like a predator sizing up prey. The enemy we face isn't shooting back at paper targets. They're trying to put bullets through your skull while you're trying to put one through theirs. At 4,000 meters, you're dealing with wind drift that can push a bullet several feet off target. You're calculating for temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and the rotation of the earth itself. Behind the general, Sergeant Alexei Volkov smirked and whispered to his companion, "Watch her run crying back to whatever kitchen she crawled out of." Volkov was the unit's second-best marksman, known for his arrogance almost as much as his skill. He had already made it clear that he didn't believe women belonged anywhere near a battlefield, let alone in specialized units. Maria had heard similar comments throughout her journey to this training facility. Military officials had tried to redirect her to nursing units or communications roles. Some had laughed outright when she insisted on sniper training. Others had made crude jokes about her motivations, but Maria carried with her the memory of her village burning, of her younger brother's lifeless body, and of the promise she had made over his grave. "I understand the requirements, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. "I'm not here by accident or mistake. I've studied ballistics, meteorology, and fieldcraft. I know that beyond 3,000 meters, most rifles lose their effectiveness. I know that at 4,000 meters you're pushing the absolute limits of small arms capability. General Kozlov raised an eyebrow, surprised by her technical knowledge. Most recruits stumbled through basic terminology, but this woman spoke with the confidence of someone who had actually studied the science behind long-range shooting. Still, knowledge was one thing and practical application under pressure was entirely different. Knowledge from books is worthless without the skill to apply it, he said, gesturing toward the firing range. But since you seem so confident, let's see what you can do. We'll start with something reasonable for a beginner. There's a target at 800 meters. Hit center mass, and we'll talk about whether you belong here. Maria nodded and followed the general to the firing line. The other recruits gathered around, some curious, others clearly expecting entertainment at her expense. She accepted the rifle offered by the range instructor, a standard-issue Mosin Nagant that had seen better days. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, similar to the hunting rifles she had used back home, though heavier and more robust. As she settled into position, Maria blocked out the whispered comments and focused on the fundamentals her father had drilled into her. She studied the wind indicators scattered across the range, noting the direction and intensity of air movement at various distances. The late afternoon sun created challenging lighting conditions, with shadows beginning to stretch across the target area. The 800-meter target appeared impossibly small through the rifle's iron sights. Maria took several deep breaths, allowing her heart rate to settle into a steady rhythm. She had learned long ago that the best shots happened in the natural pause between heartbeats when the body was completely still for just a fraction of a second. General Kozlov watched through binoculars, ready to dismiss this experiment and send the woman back to whatever administrative role might suit her better. He had seen talented male shooters struggle with this distance, and he expected nothing different from someone who had never faced combat conditions. Maria squeezed the trigger with smooth, consistent pressure, following through completely as the rifle fired. The sound echoed across the training ground, followed by an unusual silence as everyone waited to see the result through their spotting scopes. The target spotter's voice cracked slightly as he announced, "Dead center, sir, perfect bullseye." For the first time in months, General Kozlov found himself genuinely surprised.